Hey everyone, Mad Naturalist Mr. Langers here. Now, the last time we were here, we talked about ecosystems, and I mentioned something called a biome, and that's the focus of this particular installment. We're going to be looking at terrestrial biomes. Now, a biome is a region of the planet that has similar, or regions of the planet that have similar climate characteristics, specifically precipitation and temperature. Now, because of that, we also tend to find species, specifically plants, because plants rule everything, that have similar adaptations to deal with those climate conditions. And if we're talking about, let's say, deserts, for example, we're looking at plants that have to deal with very limited rainfall, extreme temperatures, and conserving as much water as possible. So in the southwest United States, you have cacti. In other deserts, you have other similar kinds of plants. They may not necessarily be cacti, but they could be a succulent or other kind of plant that have similar adaptations and traits. Now, animals also follow the same thing, but for biomes, we concern ourselves almost exclusively with plants because plants form the basis of any ecosystem and any food pyramid. So plants are king. The more plants you have in general, the more biodiverse your ecosystem will be. Now, if we're looking at climates and precipitations and all these things for these different biomes, we have to become familiar with something called a climatogram. Now, a climatogram is simply just a hybrid graph of a line and a bar graph. Then they show us climate conditions over a set period of time. Now, this is usually month by month over an entire calendar year, starting in January, ending in December. That's what goes on the x-axis. Now, like I said, it's a hybrid bar and line graph. That means you have precipitation always represented by bars for each month, and the line represents temperature changes over the course of that year, month to month as well. Now, my piece of advice is this. My students will always get this wrong at first. Be careful of which y-axis you're looking at, because they are not at the same scale. I'll ask questions, for example, for this climatogram, what is the maximum temperature? And I'll have students look at the line graph and automatically go to the left where they're used to seeing the data they need shown and say, oh, about 150 degrees Celsius. Which, if they thought for a second, they know is absolutely absurd because water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, and nowhere on planet Earth's surface, other than near like a volcanic vent, do you find boiling water. So always pay attention to what side of the graph you're looking at. And it takes some practice, but it's pretty easy. Now, each of the 9 terrestrial biomes we're going to be looking at has its own climatogram that's associated with it, with its own specific trends. So let's take a look at those now. Okay, tundra. Tundra is represented perfectly by this picture. We're talking about regions of the planet that have very low temperature and low precipitation. Right? So we're looking at temperature ranges between -10 and 5 degrees Celsius and 0 to 100 centimeters of rain, which is not that much. It's pretty dry. And you can see that in the climatogram over here. Now, we find mostly shrubs and lichens. You do not find trees. And there's a good reason for that, and we'll talk about that in a second. Animal species, we're looking at hare, Arctic fox, polar bear, caribou. This is not all the species. This is just a sampling. There's dozens more. But this is just a small sampling of what we got. And the rest of these biomes will have similar flow. We're looking at Greenland, extreme northern Asia, so that's northern Russia, North America, extreme northern North America. Those are all places where you find this biome. You don't usually find it in the southern hemisphere. It's mostly in the northern hemisphere. Now, the reason why you don't see a lot of trees is because of something called permafrost. Below a couple of inches of soil, you have permanently frozen ground. And I'm not talking like, slushy. I'm talking like rock hard. So you don't have roots penetrating into that. So that's why you don't have a lot of trees. Now, with low precipitation, cool temperatures, and shallow soil, you have very low net primary productivity, or NPP. Primary productivity is a very important concept in environmental science, and we're definitely going to talk about it in detail later. But all you need to know right now is that primary productivity or net primary productivity is a measurement of how many plants basically are in an area, how much photosynthesis is going on. The higher the productivity, the more plants you have, and the more plants you have, the more biodiversity you have in an ecosystem. It's all related. So remember, more productivity, more plants, more biodiversity, because plants provide food and shelter and all sorts of other resources for wildlife. Now, moving on. Next one, Boreal forest or Taiga. This is slightly to the south of the Tundra biome. It's one of the largest almost continuous forest system in the world. It halos the northern hemisphere, and it stretches from North America to Asia and all around again. Temperature ranges between -5 and 10 degrees Celsius with 25 to 200 centimeters of rain. So it's definitely rains more. It's a little warmer, but not that much. Dominated by conifers, so that's pine, spruce, fir, trees like that. You don't find a lot of deciduous trees because, one, it's too cold, and two, the soil is not great, and you usually find pines and conifers when you don't have that great of soil. Usually between 50 and 60 degrees north is primarily what we find, so that's North America, that's Northern Europe, that's Northern Russia, those are all those kinds of locations. Growing season is short, it's cold. Again, low precipitation and slow decomposition means you don't have a lot of soil nutrients, which means you have low net primary productivity. And common animal species, you can find moose, wolf, bear, again, small sampling, but this is what you can find. So this is the taiga or boreal forest biome, a very important biome in the northern hemisphere. Next, moving on to the temperate rainforest, and yes, you saw that right, it's a rainforest, it's just cooler. We're looking at temperatures between 5 and 20 degrees Celsius, and precipitation ranging from 150 to 350 centimeters. So it's definitely more damp than usual, than what we've been talking about so far. Conifers, again, reign supreme, but you also get things like ferns and mosses are also very common in this biome. Bear, both black bear and grizzly bear, grouse, banana slug, spotted owl, which is a very important species when looking at the Endangered Species Act. These are all animals that find these biomes home. Pacific Northwest and the west coast of Canada are perfect examples of this biome. There are other places, but these are the largest stretches. It's a coastal biome. You only find temperate rainforests along coastlines. You will not find them inland. You need to have that steady flow of moist air coming off the ocean to get this to work. Lots of precipitation and moderate temperatures means high net primary productivity. The plants grow really quickly and they grow really big. You get very big trees in this kind of biome. Also, because the plants grow so fast, you tend not to have that many nutrients in the soil just because they get used up. And they also get washed out from all the rain. All right, so it's an important biome. It's a very unique biome and very limited. So it's something worth keeping your eye on and preserving. Next, my home turf, the temperate seasonal or deciduous forest. Basically any kind of forest that goes through autumn. So we're looking at temperature range between 5 and 20 degrees Celsius with 50 to 225 centimeters of rain. Broadleaf deciduous trees dominate this, and that would be the maples, the hickories, the oaks. Those are all deciduous trees, broadleaf. Not as many pines. These are better competitors. So again, any tree that goes through that dormant period, fall, loses its leaves, that's what we're talking about. And you'll find species like squirrel, chipmunk, you'll find bobcat, white-tailed deer, black bear. These are all common. And a region would be New England or the Northeast United States. Hometown, right? That's the perfect, one of the best examples of this deciduous forest. Now, warmer temperatures mean rapid decomposition, which means lots of soil nutrients, which means high net primary productivity. It also means that these tend to be biomes that are targeted first for agricultural development, which is great for people, not so great for the natural world, right? So, especially where I'm from, mostly what we have here is what's called a second growth forest, because it was all farmland at one point in time, farm and pasture land. But since the farms have been abandoned, now it's pretty much just trees, which is good. It's getting back to what it should be. So, moving on to the next one. Now, woodland, shrubland, chaparral, it all refers to the same kind of biome. We're talking something a little more on the arid side. So temperature ranging between -5 and 20 degrees Celsius and 25 to 125 centimeters of rain. That's common for this area. You can see it's pretty distinct. In the summer months, it's really dry. In the winter months, it tends to be more damp. And this picture sums it up very nicely. It's a scrubby kind of brushland. So you don't find a lot of trees, large trees. You'll find sages and yucca and other drought-resistant kind of plants, more brush than a forest. Animal species, you'll find mule deer, the roadrunner, like literally roadrunner, coyote, jackrabbit, they're common here as well. If you're looking for a location on Earth to focus your mind, we're talking the Mediterranean coast or Southern California are good examples of what chaparral is. Primary productivity is limited by how little rainfall and how hot the temperatures can get. It's also, you have species here that have evolved to deal with fire and in some cases need wildfires regularly to complete their life cycle and complete their reproductive cycle. So these are all species, both animals and plants, that are accustomed to it, right? And fire suppression, which is when humans keep fires from burning, messes with the natural order of things. And that's not a great thing, not a great system. Temperate grasslands, the Great Plains, Manifest Destiny, and everything like that. We're looking at pretty cold, cool, and very little rainfall between -5 and 20 degrees Celsius, 0 to 50 centimeters of rain, so it's pretty dry. The plants, though, there are really good adapted for this. Mostly grasses, deep-rooted grasses for dealing with fire and also taking as much water from deep down as possible. You'll find things like bison, pronghorn, prairie dog, black-footed ferret, sage grouse. These are all common species you'll find out in the plains. Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, these are all kinds of states and regions that you can expect to see this kind of biome, or at least where it was common. The temperatures and the little precipitation limits productivity. Again, you have species that have evolved around a fire cycle. That's also a reason why you don't see a lot of large trees, because the fire just burns them before they can ever grow up. So that's why it's mostly grass. The grasses are fast growing and deep rooted, and they can stick around and survive regular burns. Now, everyone's favorite tropical rainforest. Tropical rainforests exist around the equator in a belt that's circled the globe. We're looking at pretty constant high temperatures and constant high rainfall all year long. 20 to 30 degrees Celsius in temperature, 250 to 450 centimeters of rainfall. It's damp. It rains a lot. Now, you find broadleaf evergreens here. As opposed to a pine tree, which is an evergreen, these are evergreen because there's just no need to ever go dormant. They lose leaves and put new ones out all the time, so there's never an autumn period in the rainforest. It's always green. And you'll find some charismatic species like poison dart frogs, gorilla, orangutan, chimpanzee, jaguar, tapir. These are all common species you find in these regions. Areas, the Amazon basin, the Congo basin, Sumatra, these are all regions along the equator that have rainforests. These are some of the most biodiverse regions on the planet, accounting for about 2/3 of all terrestrial life. It's crazy. Interestingly, though, because you have such high temperatures and such high precipitation, you have rapid plant growth, which means high net primary productivity, which means high biodiversity, but also because the plants grow so fast, and because it rains so much, the soil is actually pretty nutrient poor. So it's not great farmland. It gets cleared regularly for farmland, but it's not great. People have to keep clearing more because the nutrients get used up so fast. Now, tropical seasonal or tropical dry forest or savanna, again, kind of like the scrubland one, multiple names, same kind of biome. We're talking about something between 20 and 30 degrees Celsius and 50 to 275 centimeters of rain. Now, we're talking about grasses, broadleaf grasses, not a lot of woody shrubs or trees. Common species would be zebra or lion or elephant or rhinoceros or anything like that. That's what's living here. And I think of the Serengeti. Now, what's interesting about this biome is that it has a distinct dry and wet season. The winter months, or our summer, I should say. So that would be like July, August, September. Those are the dry months, the dry season. And then from November to April or May, that's when you start getting the wet season where most of the growth happens. Now, because of the high temperatures, you get lots of decomposition. You get fairly nutrient-rich soil, which means it gets developed for agriculture, just like the deciduous forests do, which is not always a great thing. Also, because these also have regular burns, you'll have regular wildfires. That's one of the reasons why you don't have as many large trees. You definitely have more trees than you do in the temperate grasslands, but not as much. It's not really a forest. All right, we're going to end on the desert. Now, if I was to pick two biomes that we as a species have a pretty good idea of what they are all about, it would be the rainforest, it'd be the desert. And we're talking extreme temperature and very, 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 very little rainfall. So we're looking at 18 to 31 degrees Celsius and precipitation ranging between 0 and 100 centimeters. Right? It's just hot and dry all the time, and the species that live there have to deal with that. We're looking at cacti, succulents, other plants that conserve water and deal with the high temperatures. We're also looking at animals like camel or kangaroo rat or Gila monster, scorpions, jackals, these kinds of species that, again, live in this arid kind of environment. The Sahara, the Gobi, the Mojave, these are all the big deserts that circle the globe. All similar characteristics. Now, limited rainfall, extreme temperature means very low net primary productivity, which means very little biodiversity. And that's an important idea because the less biodiversity you have, the more susceptible your biome is to a disturbance. And we'll talk about what disturbances are later. But I want you to look at the precipitation range for this. It should look familiar. It's the exact same range as the tundra. They are basically the same kind of biome. It's just one is considerably hotter than the other. So they both are very low in biodiversity, and that means they're both very sensitive to disturbances. And again, we'll talk about what that means later on. Now, when it does rain, and it doesn't rain often, but when it does, plants take advantage. There's a very brief but very rapid plant growth where you have a lot of flowers blooming, plants growing, seeds being produced, and then as soon as the rains stop and everything dries up and bakes away, everything goes back to where it is until the next rains come, which could be next year or could be the next decade. Depends. All right, so let's recap. A biome is a region of the planet or regions of the planet that share similar characteristics. You could have the same biome pop up in multiple locations all across the globe. Now, the species that live in a biome have evolved specifically with those kinds of conditions in mind. So the plant and animal community have all evolved around this central climate kind of condition. And you'll see the same adaptations appear in different communities in the same biome as you go across the globe. Not the same species, but similar adaptations. Okay, so that does it for terrestrial biomes. Until next time, peace.